India and the United Kingdom recently finalized a free trade agreement, an FTA, that is expected to bring significant economic benefits to both nations. India will reduce tariffs on 90% of UK imports, with 85% of them becoming tariff free over the next decade. The deal also includes tariff reductions on UK spirits, initially halved to 75% and later reduced to 40% over 10 years. Additionally, automobile imports from the UK, previously subject to a 100% tariff, are set to decline to just 10%.
Mr. Speaker, he makes a very good point. We are backing British car companies like JLR, and our India trade deal will see tariffs slashed for car sales, and that is good for British jobs. And the criticism on the double taxation is incoherent nonsense.
India's exporters would benefit greatly, as over 99% of its tariff lines enjoy zero duty access in the UK. The agreement addresses concerns regarding double social security payments for Indian workers and is projected to boost bilateral trade by £25.5 billion annually from 2040.
Mobility is something which was very, very important for us to be able to send our skilled force from here, be able to kind of work together in some of these areas. So most certainly a big boost from both the services as well as the goods standpoint.
Tariff reductions are scheduled to begin immediately, making Indian textiles, pharmaceuticals, and IT services more competitive in the global market. The deal is anticipated to attract new investments and generate employment across manufacturing, technology, and services sectors. Small businesses would also gain increased access to UK and global markets, while British companies would tap into India's massive consumer base.
And in case we want to be in a big league, naturally we have to think and work in a direction where you are more liberalized, you are more open to the world, you can export more, you can import more.
Both nations plan to collaborate on advanced technologies in artificial intelligence, space research, and biotechnology. Additionally, scholarships and research partnerships between Indian and UK universities are set to expand. The agreement strengthens India's role as a key global supplier and paves the way for future trade deals. The Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, Professor Abhijit Das, international trade expert who was long associated with the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade and was the head of the WTO Center there, joins us now. Professor Das, how does this deal, compare with other FTAs India has negotiated? Why is it being seen as a template, for future deals?
Firstly, thank you, Mark, for having me on your program. It's always a privilege to be here. We need to contextualize this agreement in a situation when President Trump and United States has launched a frontal assault on rules-based system. Here we have two very large economies, India and UK, coming together, demonstrating the power of cooperation, collaboration to finalize a trade agreement that is rules-based. So it does send a very, very powerful signal world over. So that is the first point which we have to recognize. The second point which we need to recognize is that although at this juncture, we do not have the legal text in public domain, but based on what we've been reading in the media or hearing in the media, it appears that Indian exports, particularly in labor-intensive sectors such as clothing, textiles, gems and jewelry, they will get significant duty reductions. Let's remind ourselves that particularly in the wearing apparel sector, although the duty in UK may appear to be relatively low at 11% or so, this is almost 3 times the average duty.
Okay.
So lowering of this duty will give us considerable benefit for our apparel exporters, and there could be many other sectors where we will stand to gain. So no doubt, this is a landmark agreement.
Yes.
And why it is being talked of as a very big achievement is that it is an agreement with one of the largest economies in times of trade turmoil.
Okay, indeed. But Professor Das, how does it boost India's SME manufacturing capacities?
There we will have to again await the fine print. But let's remind ourselves that when it comes to the clothing sector, much of what India exports gets sourced from MSME sectors. So the large exporters really source their supplies from MSME. So if the large exporters are able to expand their exports to the UK, that in turn will boost the sales of MSMEs. And that is just one illustration. There could be other sectors, particularly, let's say, in the leather sector or gems and jewelry sector, where the same dynamics will play out. So it will be a very important win, not only for the Indian exporters, but for the upstream MSMEs who supply to our exporters.
Indeed. Professor Das, also, how does it benefit Indian multinationals with a strong UK presence, Tata's, Mahindra, Infosys, Wipro, etc.?
Here we have to look at two dimensions. One is from the manufacturing perspective, where movement of parts and components around supply chains, that will get facilitated, no doubt about it. When it comes to services sector, again, what we've been hearing and reading, as I had mentioned earlier, we don't have the final text, but what we've been hearing and reading is that the agreement contains important provisions which will facilitate intra-corporate movement of professionals, movement of independent personnel, professionals. So in sum, the agreement really will help Indian entities which have a presence in the UK as well, through supply chains and through movement of professionals.
Indeed, Professor Das, India has already had signed agreements with Australia, UAE, with the European Free Trade Association. And this, reports say, is much better. I mean, let's say, for instance, in Australia, the elimination was for 96% of the tariffs, but here it's 99% of the tariffs, apparently. And also, the visa pathways were largely only for certain types of individuals. Here, there's a lot more mobility of labor. So how do you see this as a template once again?
What we need to remember is that the UK economy is far larger in size compared to Australia or compared to what we've done with our past FTAs. And number two, in UK, we have close cultural ties. We have a big diaspora. That is going to create a considerable demand for Indian exports. We also have a huge presence of Indian business entities in UK that will facilitate manufacturing exports as well as services exports. So given these taking these factors into consideration, what we see in this agreement can become a template. In fact, the concessions that we may have given in this agreement really thereafter now becomes the floor for our negotiations with both European Union and US. So those negotiations perhaps will treat the concessions that we've granted as the starting point.
So which do you think would be negotiated faster? The EU also, as was our negotiations there have been going on for a long, long time. And well, the US also seems to be keen on working out a deal fast. There is a feeling that by this year itself, we'll have both these deals organized. In that context, you see this, the momentum being built up by this particular agreement?
Absolutely, no doubt, Mark. This agreement will build the momentum for a successful conclusion of the bilateral trade agreement with US, as well as the more comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union. And what we will really need to remember is that the agreement with UK will not come into force immediately. There will be a time for domestic ratification on both sides. Prior to that, there'll be legal scrubbing. And it will come into force maybe 9 months or a year down the line.
Okay. We leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Abhijit Das, international trade expert. Thank you for putting that into context for us.